Good morning. Welcome to the Church360 Ledger Transactions webinar. My name is Jordan Bogart. I am a software support technician with Concordia Technology Solutions. I've been with Concordia Technology Solutions for almost 11 years here now, so I've been around for a while and have had a lot of experience working with users of Church360 over the years, and so I'm very excited to be with you guys today to show the new version of Church360 Ledger. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can find my contact information here. You can see both my email address and phone number. I will mention that all phones and microphones have been muted for today's session. So if you have any questions, we have a questions window where you can ask any questions you may have, and don't hold back. If you have any questions during the webinar, please ask them as they come to mind. Joining me today to help answer those questions is my manager, Rod Kiles. And so you can see his contact information here. And he's been with CTS for almost 25 years here now. So between the two of us, we have a lot of knowledge about Church360. We're more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. All right, let's go ahead and get into today's session. So I want to go ahead and just give you a brief breakdown of the class. So we're going over our agenda right now, and then we're going to go into discussion about Church360, which is Church360 Ledger, which is going to be the bulk of our training today. There will be a quiz near the end of today's training. Don't stress out about it. You're not being graded. This is just to see if you kind of retained what I've communicated during today's training. And then there'll be time at the end for any additional questions and answers that you might have. But again, if you have questions during the training, please feel free to ask. All right, so let's go ahead and get into a breakdown of what we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing we're going to be discussing is going to be payees. We're going to be talking about setting up your payees. So before you can start entering transactions, you probably need people that you need to pay. So payees is going to be first. Then we're going to talk about some basic conventions of transactions, some ground rules to follow when you're working with transactions. We're going to talk a little bit about debits versus credits. It's important to understand that for transactions. And then we're going to talk about the various transaction types that we offer in Church360 Ledger. During that process, we'll also be talking about printing checks. So a wide variety of things to talk about today. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn off my camera here for now so we can just focus in on the screen. And let's go ahead and dive into our first topic, which is going to be payees. So with payees, these are the people that you would pay in Church360. And, when you're writing transactions, you're going to be paying a variety of different people, companies, organizations, maybe other churches, government bodies. There's all sorts of different things, all sorts of different people and organizations that you might be working with. So in order to track those transactions accurately, you need to say who you're paying, and that's what payees are for. To get to your payees screen, you're going to click the gear icon over on the left side of the screen. And then from here, we're going to go down to the ledger section and select payees. And this is going to present you with your list of payees. So you'll see options to add new payees up here. You can show archived payees. This is a list you could print out, you can export, you can even import in a list of payees as well. If you're searching for a particular payee in this filter by box, you could start typing in a payee name. So if I type in Missouri, for example, I can find, oh yeah, I have two payees that start with Missouri, Missouri American Water and Missouri Department of Revenue. I'll back that up for now. Then you'll get into your list of payees. So you will see your payees listed by default in alphabetical order. Now you can so you can kind of see that all listed there. So you'll see that. You will see the name of the payee. If there's been a description entered to give you any additional details about that payee there, a phone number and email address, and then a payee type. And we break this down into two different types. Payees are either considered individuals or businesses. Now I know technically everything that's not an individual wouldn't necessarily be a business per se, but it's business, organization, whatever you might have there. And then we have the various actions that you could take with these payees. So you'll see there's an option to edit a payee. So make any changes to that payee, and the little sidebar will pop up here where you can make those changes. There's an option to archive a payee, and when you archive a payee, what that's doing is essentially saying we're not using this payee in transactions anymore. It's maybe we've switched to another provider for something, or we just haven't used this payee in several years, and we don't really have any plans to do that in the future. If you archive a payee, what will happen? Like, let's say we archive the yellow pages here. Well, when I do that, you'll notice it disappears from the list. But if I click Show Archived, I can go down and you can see that Yellow Pages is still there. So what this means is this payee's transactions are still in the system. They'll still be listed as their transactions, but you can't enter any new transactions for that payee. Or if you go and edit a transaction, you can't edit it to select this payee. But what you could do is you could go down here. If you've not clicked the show archive, you can see this hide archive right now because I'm showing the archive people. And then if I click on this button here, this would unarchive this payee. So you're back to being able to use that payee again. And then the last button we see here is the various payee action. If I click here on this, it would take me into the payee detail screen. The payee detail screen provides me with some information about that payee. It also provides me with the recent transactions section here that shows all the recent transactions for this particular payee. If you click See More, this is going to go ahead and go over to your general ledger screen, where you would be able to see the general ledger screen filtered over the time period you select up here to show you just the transactions for this one particular payee. So this can be very helpful if you're trying to get more detail about the payee. Another thing we offer is a summary report for a payee. So if I click on summary report, it will show me all the different calendar years I have transactions for this particular payee. So if I clicked on calendar year 2024, I could get a summary report for this particular payee to see, okay, here's what we paid them during the course of 2024. In the case of individual payees, you can even use these payee summary reports to help you in generating 1099s for those people then. And in fact, one thing we do over here on the payee screen is if somebody has met the threshold where they might need a 1099, we put a little icon next to them here that indicates, hey, they may need a 1099. The threshold for that is if you have spent over $600 on an individual payee, an individual type payee during the course of a year. So that's when you're going to see that then. Now, if you want to add a new payee, of course, you'll press the Add New Payee button. And when we do that, the first question it's going to ask you, is this an individual or a business? Individual, of course, would be a singular individual person. A business would be a business or a company or an organization, another church. Again, the list goes on. But let's go back to individual here, because there's one thing I want to show you that individual has that business does not. Because the new version of Church360 Ledger resides within Church360 members now, one thing it can do is it can actually look at person records from Church360 members and create a payee record from the person records in Church360 members. So if I were to select Dave Abbott here, this is going to go in and this is going to show Dave Abbott's information that he already had on his person record. Then it's going to go ahead and pull that information in to help you just enter in his payee information without you having to go through and manually type it all out. But again, if you prefer, of course, you don't want it linked to the to the person record. Of course, you don't have to do that. It is an option for you if you would like. But let's go ahead through and add a payee here. So let's go ahead and let's add in the widget company. So we'll just say widget company. So you see that there. There is a legal name here. This is, again, more used for individuals typically. But if there is like a proper legal name that needs to be on like checks you would issue to this company, you would go ahead and do that there. You put in the street address here. So let's say this is they're at 555 Widget Avenue. And let's say St. Louis, Missouri, 63118. And then over here, we can go ahead and we could type in their phone number. So we'll do 555-555-555, oops, 55-5555. There we go. Took care of that for me. Any email address you might want. There's a description. If there's any sort of tax ID number you'd like to include for this pay, you can fill that in there. And then, of course, any additional notes. When I'm done, I'll click Save on this. And you can see now I have the widget company, and I would be able to use that. I would be able to use that payee when I'm running a transaction. So that's how payees would work. This is how you would go ahead and establish your payees. You want to go through them before you start entering your transactions. You want to start entering your payees ahead of time. You have to have the payee here in place before you could assign them to a transaction. So if you start to enter a transaction for a payee you don't have yet, you'll need to back out, come to here, and create that payee record. Okay, so that's what we have on payees today. Let's go ahead and let's move on next to talk about transactions and transaction conventions. So again, these are some ground rules that we have about transactions, basically. It's important things to know and understand when it comes to creating transactions here in the system. So what are some rules we need to consider? Well, number one, every transaction has to have a date. Every transaction happened at some time on some date. That's just the way it is. You're not gonna have a transaction that just doesn't have a date. So you have to have a date on every single transaction. Now, every transaction then has the option of including a memo and line item description. So this is an improvement from the previous version of Ledger, because you might remember from the previous version of Ledger, you could only do a memo for the entire transaction. That can prove to be a little restrictive for a lot of our users. So now, not only can you do a memo for the transaction as a whole, but you can also go through and individually have a description for each line item. And again, that can be very helpful to have. Another transaction convention to consider is that every single transaction, at the minimum, will involve at least two accounts. As I mentioned during our previous training, this is a dual entry bookkeeping system. And that means every transaction, you're going to have at least two accounts. You'll have basically, and that then goes into my next point, where your debits and credits must balance. Every transaction is going to have equal debits and equal credits. And debits and credits affect how accounts go up and down in their balance. Now, to get a better idea of how that happens, I want to show you this next view here. And that's talking about our debits and credits chart. This is a chart we have in our help center as well. So if you are, you're thinking, man, I can't memorize all this. Don't worry, you don't have to. This is something we have readily available within our help center. But what this shows us here is this shows us every type of account. We went through these accounts yesterday during our chart of accounts training. And here's what it would take to increase this account. Here's what it would take to decrease this account. Sometimes I see people get hung up on the term debit and credit, and they think debit always means decrease and credit always means increase. That's not really what they mean. Debit and credit, it's almost more accurate to say that debit and credit really more mean like left and right. We're saying debits are going to be on the left side of the transaction, credits are going to be on the right side of the transaction. And different accounts, as you can see, are affected in different ways by debits and credits. So it's just important to understand that really debit and credit doesn't mean increase and decrease. It really just means left and right. Okay. Well, the next thing I'd like to talk about here are our different transaction types. And the first type of transactions we're going to talk about are deposits. Deposits, very simply, they allow users to deposit money into asset accounts. That's the primary way you're going to be using deposits. Some good examples of this are going to be, of course, offerings are going to be the big one, but your church may also have rental income if your church has any like rental properties or things like that, or you guys rent out your fellowship hall for something, so you'd have something like that. Typically, so with deposits, these transactions, of Of course, they're going to go into assets. That's the one account you're going to be using. But these transactions are then offset by income accounts, liability accounts, and fund accounts. So that's going to be the other side of the transaction. Now, you might have multiple income accounts, you might have multiple liability accounts, you might have multiple fund accounts that you use. But at the minimum, you're going to have at least one of those items in your deposit. Deposits also integrate with the offerings portion of Church360 members. So let me go ahead and show you a few things about deposits here. So let's start off with just a basic, easy deposit here. So we're going to switch over to hold on, there we go. We're going to switch back over to Church360 Ledger. And when we enter in transactions to Church360 Ledger, if you want to enter in a new transaction, you click the transaction button up here, you click deposit, and this is going to bring up the deposit window where you can enter in a deposit. So when I am entering in a deposit, I just have a very basic deposit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, where is this deposit going? This is where I'm picking the asset account the deposit is going to go to. So let's say this is going to go into my checking account. And then I'm going to date the transaction. So let's say we're going to put this back on the 11th here. Now, typically speaking, most deposits are only going to go into a single asset account. You most of the time will not have a deposit that goes into multiple asset accounts. But we give you that option if you would like to. If you want to deposit to more than one asset account at once, click this divide among multiple asset accounts button, and then you would have the option to select multiple asset accounts to deposit to at one time. This will not impede you from doing any sort of reconciliation later on down the line, so don't worry about that. Okay, but let me go back just a step. I'm going to go back to depositing to just a single asset account. So I'm going to set things up just the way they were. Now, next you'll notice that there is a payee field that does read optional. For the overwhelming majority of situations, you are not going to have a payee for a deposit because you're not paying anybody. The church is receiving money in this case. So really, this isn't something you most of the time need to worry about. Down here in the deposit slip section, this is where we're going to select our offset accounts. So this is where we're going to be selecting our income, our liability, or our fund accounts that we're going to be using. Income, of course, is probably going to be your most commonly used thing, then followed next by funds. Liabilities, they can be used. A lot of the times where I'll see liabilities used in a deposit is when if the church is receiving a loan to deposit the money into the church's account. At that point, typically a deposit takes place because you would start the liability at a $0 balance, and then you would deposit the money into the liability and also into the bank through a deposit here. What that'll do is that will increase the balance of the bank account, but it will also increase the balance of the liability, showing that the church owes that money. But let's go ahead and go into, again, just a very basic deposit. So let's say that the church receives some money to the general fund. And when I'm selecting my accounts, what I can do to quickly find the account I want, if I start typing in the account name or the account number, I could go ahead and say, okay, well, some of this is going to be going into the general fund. So let's say we received $750 for the general fund. And then in the line item description, if there's any additional detail about that I need to put in, I can do that. In the case of the general fund, I'm not going to do that though. But let's say I've received money for more than one purpose here. So I'm going to click add line. And for the second line here, let's go ahead and say we received some money for our youth mission trip here. And we're going to go ahead and say we received another $250 for that. And let's say this was paying for bus rental. So we're going to be renting a bus to get the youth there. And so this is somebody saying, hey, I want to pay for the bus rental. Probably run more than $250, but again, we're just using this as an example. When you are working with a transaction, if you need to remove a line item, if you click this trash can icon, this would get rid of this particular line item then. You then have an overall transaction memo. So if there is any sort of overall detail you'd like to include about a transaction, you can do so in the memo line. So you have more, so you kind of have an overall memo line, and then you have your individual descriptions here as well. Finally, the last thing we've added, and this is a new feature we've added from the old version of Ledger, is you now have the option to upload a receipt here into your deposit. So you could actually go ahead, and when you click this button, you'll notice it pulls up a browse window on your computer here. And when you click this browse window, what would happen is you could upload a file or an image to this deposit, and you can add attachments to it. So for deposit, in the case of a deposit, if you're doing your weekly offerings, maybe you want to upload a PDF or a snapshot of your counter sheet so you can verify, hey, back to the counter sheet, we match up what we had on the counter sheet here. So that's the receipts option here now. Once you're done entering a deposit, if you click the save option, this is going to go ahead now and bring you to the save transaction screen where you can see all the detail about this deposit. You're going to see the date of the deposit, the amount the deposit was for overall, what asset account it was deposited to, the memo that you entered. Has this transaction been reconciled yet? Here is a running balance of the asset account that it was deposited into. Here's the different line items that we used. If you uploaded any receipts, that's where you'd see the images. You'd be able to click on them there to view them. And then any related transactions. And basically, these are transactions where the same line items were used in those transactions. They don't all have to be the same, but like this is saying, oh, here's other places where probably the general fund was used. So you can kind of see those there. We have some options along the top. If I need to edit the transaction, I click Edit Transaction here, and I can go back into the transaction to make any changes I may need. If I want to copy this transaction to make a new copy of it, you can do that there. There is a Make Recurring option. We'll dive more into that a little bit later. It's going to show you when this transaction was last edited, and there's an option to void this transaction out entirely. Also, if you want to print out this individual transaction, you click this print option here. This will let you print this out, and this would also let you go ahead and export this transaction out to Excel if you would like. Okay, so that's a very basic form of a deposit. Next, I want to show you, if you have the Church360 members program, how you can take an offering batch from Church360 members and process it as a pending deposit here in Church360 Ledger. So if I go over to my offering screen and I take a look here, I entered an offering batch here into the system. And what I'm going to do with that is if I click on this transaction here, this shows me the transaction. So the offering batch. And with this offering batch, you'll notice there's a button here that says Post to Ledger. Now, I'm not going to get into actually creating the offering batch. We have a separate training for the offerings portion of Church360. But if you click this Post to Ledger button here, this will send this offering batch over to the Ledger portion of the software. And when I go back to Ledger and I look at my to-do items, you'll see I have some pending transactions to review. If I click on this brings up a sidebar that's going to show me all the pending transactions I have waiting. Now I have this electric bill up here. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But I also have this deposit here, these offerings given on May 11th, 2025 for $1,050. Now if I want to process that deposit, what I can do is I can click this little circular arrow button, and this will let me process the deposit. So pressing the Post to Ledger button doesn't automatically create the deposit for you. It creates a pending deposit for you to process in Ledger. So if I click the circular arrow button, that's going to start things up here for us. So what are you going to see when you start a pending deposit? Well, you are going to select what bank account that needs to go into. The date's going to be pre-filled in for you. Again, we're probably not going to be worrying about a payee. And then what the system does is this splits up your items under the deposit slip based on the funds they were given to, and it even has a description here saying Well, this was given to the general fund, this was given to the mission fund, this was given to the building fund. So what I would do now is I would select and say, well, this is going to the general fund, so I'm going to select the general fund here. This was given to the mission fund, I'll select that here. And this was given to the building fund, and we're going to select that here. Now, the nice part about this is this was the first time that I processed a pending deposit in this database, but it's going to remember next time around when I do that pending deposit which income accounts or which offset accounts I selected here. So the next time you would process a pending deposit, these would be pre-selected for you here when you're processing your batch. You'll also see the memo is already filled out for you. This is telling you it's coming from the offering batch that was given on May 11th. And if I save that, that goes ahead and that creates my deposit from my offerings. So very easy to have kind of that through line between your offerings into your deposits then. I should also mention here, if you ever want to go back and look at any of your transactions over time, what you can do is go to the general ledger, select the date range that you want to look at, and it's going to show you all the transactions during the time period that we have selected here. So if I were to go back into, let's say, this month, May, and I go through here, I can see this offering batch, and if I need to go ahead and make changes to it, I would click on this offering batch. I would go ahead and click, if I need to edit it, I click the pencil icon, or if I want to view the transaction detail, I click the arrow here, and that brings me right back to the transaction detail screen. So that is how we process deposits. Let's go ahead now and let's move over to talk about checks. So with a check, you're going to be using checks when you're actually issuing a physical paper check to somebody. You're not going to use this if you're doing like you're using a debit or credit card to pay for something or paying for something online. We have a separate transaction type for that. This is specifically if you are handing somebody a paper check. Now, that might mean you hand wrote it. That might mean you printed it out of Church360. Either way is fine. But again, a physical check is getting handed off when we're doing a check transaction. So if I click the transaction button and I select check, this brings up the check window, and you can see this looks very similar to how the how the deposit window looked. Again, where you're going to start at is selecting what asset account this is going to be drawn from here. Okay. So, oops, I got a little ahead of myself. Let me go back for just a second here. I did have just a few things to say about checks here. I apologize. This will allow you to print checks or do record handwritten checks. They're used for paying payees and church bills. You can use print laser checks and inkjet checks. And I should mention here, we also partner with a company called Print Revolution for checks for Church360 Ledger. So we're going to go ahead and if we go to their website here and we select checks and we go, to church checks, we have checks for Church360 Ledger where you can do middle print or top print checks. These checks are guaranteed to work with Church360 Ledger. So we do recommend you go with Print Revolution when purchasing checks if you're going to be printing checks from the system. Okay, so sorry for that quick detour. Let's go ahead and go back to our check window screen. So again, we're selecting the bank account that we want to write the check from. Now, you'll only be able to select an account that you have, thinking back to our training yesterday, you'll only be able to select an asset account that you have designated and said, we can write checks from this account. So my savings account, I guess we can do that here, but we're going to do the checking account here. Then you'll notice as soon as I selected the checking account, this is automatically selecting the next check number that would be used from that asset account. So in this case, the next check number that would be used would be 6,386. Next, we would go ahead and put in the date of the check. So we'll just say this is for today. And then you do need to select the payee because of course, you are writing this check to somebody. So in this case, let's say we're writing a check to Concordia. We purchased some worship supplies from Concordia. We really, and we're going to go ahead and send in a check to pay for that. Now again, down at the bottom, you can select a liability, expense, or a fund account. When you select the liability on a check, what that's going to do is actually reduce the balance of the liability. So this is if you're paying off a liability. You could also use an expense account here, and that's probably what you'll be using most commonly, or you can use the expense portion of an equity-backed fund. But in this case, we're paying for ministry, worship supplies from Concordia Publishing House. So I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to use our ministry expense account. And let's say we spent $250 on supplies, and let's say we purchased, I don't know, communion supplies. Okay, so we purchased that. We got everything in there, and again, you have that. So you have the main memo line if you want an overall transaction memo, and then we have a receipt section here. So if you receive a receipt from a vendor, you can go ahead and take a picture of that receipt, upload it to your transaction, and you'll have that to reference later. When I click on this brings me to the Save Transaction screen, and you can see where on each transaction where we're actually paying somebody, you're also going to have the payee information here as well, in addition to what I showed you on the deposit screen. So this is where, you're going to see all the detail about that transaction. Now, once you've written a check in Church360 Ledger, if I go back to the overview screen and I look at the to-do items, you'll now see that there's an item here that says one check to print. So anytime you enter a check into Church360 Ledger, it is automatically added to your check printing queue. Now, for a handwritten check, you're obviously not going to need to print that out from the system. But any checks you intend to print from Church360 Ledger, you'll want those to appear in the print queue. So when I click this one check to print, this brings up what we call our print queue, and you'll see a listing of all unprinted checks here in the system. So if I want to print a particular check, I'm going to click on it to select it, and then I will click Print Selected. If I had multiple checks to print, I could click on each check that I want to print and then print them out all at once. So what I'll do now is I'll click Print Selected, and this is going to bring me to my print preview screen. And there's an item we're going to select here. So if what we're going to select here now is we do need to tell the system what check style we're using. So there's a top check and a middle check option here. So you might recall when looking at the Print Revolution site, we could do a top print or a middle print check. The top print check is going to actually have the check itself on top and then two stubs below. The middle check is going to have a stub on top, the check in the middle, and then a stub on bottom. So you'll want to make sure you select the option that matches the checks that you purchased. So we'll go ahead and say this is a top print check. If we click the print button now, it's going to ask us to confirm the check number, and we want to make sure we have that check loaded into our printer. And then when we click the print button, then this is going to go ahead and bring up the print dialog box for whatever printer, web browser you're using on your computer. This is going to show you what's actually going to print onto the check that you have loaded into the printer. Once you have this the way that you want it, if you click the print button here, this will go ahead and print this check out onto the check stock that you have loaded into the printer. Now, I'm not actually going to print that today because I don't need to print this, but we're going to go ahead and click the cancel button here. And then you're presented with a window that asks you to confirm, hey, did your checks print out correctly? If they did, you'll click mark as printed, and this will take this check out of the print queue. If it didn't print correctly, let's say we forgot to load the check in the printer and we printed it out on plain paper, so we want to try printing it off again. We'll click the cancel button here. That brings us back to this window here where we have the opportunity to print the check out again. Okay, so that's what we do to print checks out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, all checks that are written into Church360 ledgers appear in the print queue, but you may not need to print out all checks. So if you have a check in your print queue that you don't need to print out, you can just select the check and click this mark as printed option here, and this will go ahead and say it's been taken care of. We don't need to print it. It will give it that printed status. And once a check has that printed status, we can no longer make any changes to that check. I can't go in and change line items around, change amounts, because there's a physical check out there now that is representative of what you put in. Now, you still have the option to void the check. And we're going to talk about voiding transactions here in just a little bit. You still have the option to void the check, and you still have the option to go ahead and copy the check, make changes to the copy, and then go back and void the original. So you still do have options when you're working with checks, even after they've been printed. So that is how checks would work. The next type of transaction I want to discuss today is going to be payroll. Payroll is a new transaction type from the over the previous version of Ledger. So, what are the payroll transactions used for? Well, they allow users to record payroll transactions. One thing about payroll transactions is they maybe take form through like a direct deposit. They may take form in the form of a check. However, when you enter a payroll transactions will appear in the print queue, which means they can be printed on check stock. The types of accounts you can use in a payroll transactions are assets, of course, because that's the bank account you're pulling from, but then also liability, expense, and fund account types. So you might be thinking, okay, well, why would I use a payroll transaction? Let me show you how they work. So if I go back over to Ledger here, and I do a new transaction, and I choose payroll, when I do a payroll transaction, this brings up the payroll window. And again, you can see it looks very similar to the previous transaction windows we've been looking at. I would select the bank account that I'm drawing this payroll transaction from, so Central Trust Checking. I'm going to select the date of the transaction. So let's say this is for the previous Friday. And then I'm going to select the payee. And I'm going to be, with a payroll transaction, typically I am selecting an individual. So let's say we're paying Derek Woods. Okay, now you'll notice there's two sections here. There's withholdings and payroll details. What we need to do, so with a payroll check, typically what happens is there's a gross amount you're paying an employee, but you're also withholding some for their check to pay for various taxes or holding some money back to pay for insurance, retirement, things like that. So what you're going to do here is, and you don't have to do it in the order I'm doing it. This is the order I personally prefer to do it in, but again, either way will work fine. What I like to do first is I like to go down to the payroll details section, and I like to put in an employee's gross pay in first. So this is what they're receiving before any taxes are withheld. So I have an expense account here that I would use, so called staff salary. And let's say that before taxes, Derek Woods would be getting $1,000. Okay. Now, obviously, as I'm sure you all have received a paycheck at some point in time, you don't get that whole $1,000. Some money is withheld from an employee's check in order to pay for taxes. So I'd come up here to the withholding section now, and if I go in here, I can put in the various liabilities I've created to account for those withholdings. So I would say, well, first up is going to be federal income tax, and maybe that amounts to $100. And then I would go in here and I'd say, well, then I have my state income tax, and maybe that's going to be another $30. And then I have Social Security, and that's going to be another $50. And I have Medicare. Whoops. And that's going to be another $40. And, it can go on and on. There's a lot of withholdings that are getting drawn from an employee's paycheck. When I click the Save button now, this is going to go ahead and create this payroll transaction. And here on the transaction details screen, it's going to show you the full amount, the total amount, so the gross pay here in the total amount section, and it's going to show the amount after withholdings. So looking back on this, yes, Derek Woods, it's going to show up in your staff salary as a full $1,000. but your staff salary expense account. But what's actually being pulled out of your checking account today is $780 then, because that's what Derek Woods is actually going to take home. The difference in that is held in the various withholding accounts for the liabilities that your church would then pay out later on behalf of the employee to the various government bodies. Also, when you go ahead and you enter in a payroll transaction, there is an option up here that says print pay stub, and you could print out a pay stub for your employee if your employee would need that. And that would include things like their current earnings, their year-to-date earnings, the taxes, and then all that payroll summary there. So you get all that. And if you click the print button here, this would let you print out a pay stub for your employee. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these payroll transactions will show up for you in your print queue. So you would have the option then of, if I do this print selected, you can see here, that's going to let you print that out if you're paying your employee with a check. If you're not paying your employee with a check though, that's okay. Just come to your print queue, click on it and say mark as printed, and that's going to go ahead and let you go ahead and take that out of the print queue while still entering in that, that saying, okay, we paid them via direct deposit, but that just gets it out of the print queue and lets you be on your way then. So that is how payroll works. Let's move on to our next transaction type. The next type of transaction to talk about today are payments. Payments are what you're going to, I would say, would be among the most common transactions you're going to be making, because these are going to be when you're paying for something, you're paying online or you're recording electronic transactions. And in the world today, I would say a lot of your transactions are going to be electronic. You're swiping a debit card, you're swiping a credit card, you're paying for something online, you have automatic bill pay set up for services. All those are going to be processed as payments. Payments are going to come out of asset and liability accounts. So again, it's going to be drawing against an asset, or again, if you're using a credit card, it's actually going to draw against a liability account for that credit card. This is also going to be offset by another liability account. So if you're paying down a liability, you'd use it as in the offset part, an expense, or from a fund account. So if I go ahead here and again, you see some examples here. You might have electronic fund transfers for utility bills, payments for bank fees, purchases on charge cards, things like that. Let's go back to Ledger now, and let's go ahead and take a look at a payment. So if I go ahead and I click the transaction button, let's go ahead and click payment. So entering a payment, it looks very similar to entering a check. The only real difference is you don't see a check number here because you're not going to have a check number. But when we enter in a payment, it's going to ask us, what do we use to pay for this? Well, let's stick with our checking account today. All right. Well, let's say for this, we are paying our monthly bill to our trash provider. And so let's say we pay that, I don't know, let's say the first Wednesday of each month we pay that. So I'm going to put that in for May 7th. And then I'm going to go ahead and put in my payee. Now, it does say optional for a payee, although with a payment, you are paying someone. So I can't, off the top of my head, imagine a situation where you wouldn't have a payee for a payment, but technically it is optional. But I would say remember to put in your payee here. So I'm going to say Allied Trash and Recycling is who we're paying here today. And then down here in the account section, I'm going to select the various offset accounts I can use. Now remember that you can select a liability, expense, or a fund account. In this case, I have an expense account for trash removal. And let's say our trash removal each month runs our church, let's say $300. I can put in the description on that. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and save that. And in a moment, there we go. That goes ahead and that creates our payment. Simple, easy, not very tricky at all. Now, what I want to talk about here, though, with payments is recurring transactions. Now, I don't want to bury the lead here because I like to show these on payments because that's probably what you'll be using recurring transactions for the most. But with recurring transactions can be used for any type of transaction. You can do these for deposits, you can do these for payroll, you can do these for checks, the whole bit. journal entries, transfers, whatever you want to do. But again, most of the time for most churches, I see them using these on payments. Why? Because probably a lot of their monthly bills are set up as just a recurring thing. They just pay them each month. Now, if I want to go ahead and make a transaction recurring after the transaction has been created, the initial transaction has been created, I would go into the save transaction, I would click make recurring, and this is where I can set up this transaction as a recurring transaction. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give a description for what this recurring transaction is for. So I'm going to go ahead and call this monthly trash. Oh, hold on. Let's go ahead and say trash removal bill. Okay. And then we're going to say, when does this happen? What repeating basis do we have this set up for? So in this case, I said that this happens we pay for this the first Wednesday of each month. So I'm going to say every single month, and you could also do every other, third, fourth, fifth. You could do a weekly recurrence, a monthly recurrence, or even an annual recurrence. But I'm going to say every single month on the first Wednesday of each month, and you could also say a particular day of the month by choosing day and then choosing which day of the month you want. But again, we're going to say the first Wednesday of each month, and then it's going to ask me, well, when should this start recurring? So when should the next time the system start generating this? So I already have the transaction for May handled. Let's go ahead and say the next time this should occur would be on June 4th, because that'll be the first Wednesday in June. So I've selected that, and when I click save, this has set this transaction up as a recurring transaction. So you might be wondering, okay, when a recurring transaction comes due, how does Church360 let me know about that? Well, if I go back to my overview, I've already set up a recurring transaction here in our system for our electric bill. Now, if I want to get to that transaction has come due. So you're going to get a notice here in your to-do items that one pending transaction is ready to review. If I click on this, this brings up my pending transaction window, and you can see I have my electric bill here. I could delete that if I don't want to process that, or if I click this circular arrow button, this brings up the pending transaction window. And this brings up a great point about your recurring transactions. You are not locked in to what you set up the recurring transaction as when you set it up in terms of amounts, line items, really anything. What you would do is you would go ahead here, and of course you're going to say the date. I'm not sure why the date didn't fill in there. I'll check in on that. But the date should be right there for you. And with the electric bill, that's something that can vary from month to month. When I set this up, this is April. April is typically an easier month on the electric bill because you're not having to run a lot of heat or air. But as we get into the summer months, things are going to start costing more. So maybe my electric bill went up this next month. So what I'm going to do is instead of keeping it at $150, well, okay, we're paying more for electric this month. So let's say this month it was $250. If I save that now, that will go ahead and process this transaction, having it come in at $250. I didn't have to stick with that $150 amount. Now, for static bills, that's great. Like for your internet bill, your bill is probably the same month to month, unless they, did a price hike or something like that. But it's probably the same from month to month. So you can just pop open that pending transaction, save it, be on your way. But with something that might change from month to month or for instance to instance on a recurring transaction, you do have the ability to change it before you actually save that transaction. Now, if you ever want to review your recurring transactions, you click recurring transactions up here, and this is going to show you a listing of your recurring transactions. It is going to show you here, okay, well, here are each of my recurring transactions. You can see there's the description. Here's the schedule of when it occurs. Here's when it's next going to occur. And if I click the edit button, let's say my trash removal bill, well, I know the price is actually going up next month, going forward next month to $325. What I can do is I can before it generates next time around, if I want to say, well, I just wanted to come in at $325 next time around, I can come in and adjust the amount, save it, and when that would next process, the default amount that will be in there will be $325 instead of $300. So again, the recurring transactions can be a great tool to just help you take care of the kind of mundane month-to-month sort of things you do in Church360 Ledger. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our next type of transaction. And the next one up here are transfers. Transfers are going to be ways to represent electronic transfers between banks and to make line item corrections. Now, one thing about transfers is it only allows moving money between similar account types. So between asset to asset, liability to liability, equity to equity, income to income, expense to expense. You can't say, well, I'm going to do a transfer from an asset to a liability. They're not the same thing. So you can't do a transfer directly between them. But again, using these to move money between bank accounts, totally normal occurrence. So let's go ahead here and let's switch over back to Ledger. And let's enter in a transaction. So a common thing I hear from churches all the time is, hey, we need to move some money from a savings account to a checking account. We had a big expenditure from the checking account. We like to keep a certain balance in there, so we want to go ahead and put the move some balance over from our savings just to make sure we're keeping the balance we want in our checking account. I'm going to go to transaction, transfer. It's going to ask you for the date of this transfer. Let's say that happened yesterday. And then we made this I think a big improvement we had here from our previous version of Ledger is now we very clearly label, okay, where are we taking our money from? Where are we moving our money to? So again, let's say we're moving some money from a savings account to checking account. So I'm going to come in here and select Central Trust Savings. And let's say we need to move $1,000 out of Central Trust Savings. And we need to move some money into Central Trust Checking. Now, one thing I want to point out, as soon as I selected Central Trust Savings, I could only select another asset account here. The system would not let you select any account type that you couldn't do a transfer to. So I'm going to say, again, Central Trust Checking, $1,000. You have your line item descriptions, your memo, any receipts. So if you get like a receipt from the bank showing this transfer, you could do that here. You save it. And you're going to see your save transaction screen that shows the transfer between these two accounts. Again, very simple to do. Now, I showed this a little bit yesterday, but I think it bears repeating, is whenever you have a new equity-backed fund, if there is a balance in it to start with, transfers are going to be the way you populate the beginning balance of an equity-backed fund. So let me show you how that would work. I have a new transaction here, and we're going to do a transfer. And let's say our church has a new child care ministry. This is something we maybe use to help parents who are struggling to pay for child care. We have a ministry where we help, kind of help out with that. So we're going to go ahead and put in a date here. Let's say we're populating, this is something we started up at the start of the month. We're going to go ahead, and where the transfer is going to come from is from our book equity. So I'm selecting book equity. And then let's say the balance, we're starting off with a balance of $2,500 in that. Then we're transferring to our child care ministry, which is the equity portion of our equity-backed fund. So we're taking $2,500 from book equity and we're transferring it into the child care ministry equity. That's going to let our child care ministry kind of establish its initial balance then. So if we save that, that has now put in our initial balance into our child care ministry. So if I go back to my chart of accounts now, and I scroll to the very bottom, sorry about that. Okay, to the very bottom. So it does, as for how the system loads, we kind of don't load in the entire chart of accounts at once. That's why you'll see that lag sometimes. There you go. You can see the child care ministry here now has that balance of $2,500, and that came from your book equity. All right. The last type of transaction we're going to discuss today are journal entries. So let's take a look here. Journal entries I almost call them the Swiss Army knife of transactions. They can really do just about anything, but we provide you with other tools for a lot of things that may be more suited for the job. But again, journal entries are probably the most flexible type of transaction. They allow users to record account balance corrections, interest earned, bank fees, etc. You can use all the account types. Now, I know I showed you this earlier, but for journal entries, this is doubly important. You need to know your debits and credits for a journal entry. If you go into a journal entry without knowing your debits and credits, you may not get the result you expect. So it's really important to understand, what a debit does to an account, what a credit does to an account. And if you don't understand that, again, check this chart. This chart is going to be important, and again, it's available within our help center. If you just search debits and credits when you're looking at our help center, you will find it. I promise you. So check that out. And once you have it, print it out, keep it at your desk. It's a great resource. All right, let's go ahead and enter in a journal entry. So we're going to go over to our ledger again. We're going to do a transaction. And one thing that we mentioned as an example for a journal entry is entering in interest to a bank account. So we received interest, of course, on our bank accounts. We have a money market account here, so I want to show earning some interest on our money market. So let's say that happened at the end of the previous month. We earn our interest. If there is a payee field, you might use a payee for a journal entry, just depending on what you're doing with it. If you're trying to show you are paying some money out through the use of a journal entry, you can use a payee, but you may not use a payee on every journal entry. It just depends what you're doing. Next, what the journal entry is going to ask you to do is select the account that you want to work with. So in this case, I want to start off working with our farmers money market account. And then it's going to ask us, well, do we want to debit this account or do we want to credit this account? In this case, a debit increases an asset and we're showing that we're earning interest. So I'm going to go ahead in here and put in that we earned $245 on our farmers money market account last month. So I'm going to put that amount in. And you'll notice when I do that, I can't enter a credit for the same line. It just wouldn't make sense to do so. We are showing, again, we are earning money through this line. Next, I at least need one more line to balance out our debits and credits. You can see right now we have $245 worth of debits, but we have no credits to balance that out, and we need an equal amount of credits here. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead, and I have an interest income account. So I'm selecting interest income here. And then over here in the credits, I also need to increase my income. I need to show that I earned money. It just so happens that when you credit an income account, it also increases. So I'm going to put in $245 here. And you can see now I have $245, both sides. Our journal entry is in balance. I, of course, can put in any line item descriptions. I could enter in a memo. I could put in a receipt. But when I'm done, I click the save button here. And there we go. We have our journal entry. This is what your saved transaction screen looks like for the journal entry. It's going to show you the line items. And the nice part about this is it breaks it out into debits and credits. And it even shows you a little arrow next to each amount to show you, was that an increase in the account or was that a decrease in the account? So again, a very helpful thing to have. Next thing I want to talk about here is going to be voiding transactions. Inevitably, you might run into a situation where you've entered in a transaction, let's say a check or something like that, and then you realize, well, we don't actually need that transaction. Maybe we wrote a check, but then the person lost a check, so we want to go ahead and void the original check and reissue them a new check. Voiding transaction is perfect for that. So what does voiding transaction do? Well, that's deleting the transaction. Now, this is different than how it worked in the previous version of Ledger, because in the previous version of Ledger, when we voided a transaction, really what was happening is we kind of created a hidden reversing transaction in the background, and we grouped those two transactions together. It just kind of looked a little bit messy. Whenever you void a transaction, though, it will appear in the event log of Church360. So you will know about it when people void. Another important part to realize about voiding transactions, it is final. You cannot undo voiding a transaction. Now, if I want to void a transaction, how that's going to work, um, what you're going to do is you're going to go to your general ledger. You're going to find the transaction that you want to void. So let's go ahead and let's take the journal entry we just entered. I'm going to find it here on the list. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go into the transaction details, and then I'm going to click void transaction. When I do that, the transaction has been voided. It'll give you a little note here that says that we're updating the year-end balances for your book. This may take a minute or two to complete. This is in the current year, so really that's no different than what it does on every transaction. But if you'd done this if this is a transaction that was in a previous fiscal year, it would need to update your beginning balances because that would affect your balances, of course, in the current year. And there we go. That transaction is now voided. Now, I did mention it shows up in the event log. I should briefly mention the event log. When I click on the gear icon here and I go to event log, you will see here there is an entry, May 14th. It shows here's the day, here's the time, here's the user who was signed in, here's the record that was affected, and we voided that journal entry here. So you will see it got rid of that. Okay, so that is our transactions discussion for today. Let's go ahead and do our quiz. So how the quiz is going to work is you are going to see questions appearing on screen, and then you will have the opportunity to answer those questions. Again, this is no pressure on you guys. You are not being graded. We are just kind of going through here and seeing, hey, did what I say stick with you? So, and I hope that it did. So let's go ahead and get into our first question. True or false? A pending deposit from the offerings module will have the total given to each fund broken out into its own line items. Okay, so thinking back to when we had an offering over in Church360 members and we posted it into Ledger, were the offerings were the amounts broken out into the funds? Okay, so let's give everyone just a minute to answer that. Looks like people are responding quite a bit. Great. Oh, wow. It's like most everyone has responded here. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll then. And we had a unanimous answer. Everyone said true, and you're exactly right. When pulling a posted batch from the offerings module into the ledger module, there will be a separate line item for each offering fund. After mapping the desired account to each line item, the next time you enter a pending deposit, the system will remember your account selection for these offerings funds. So again, as time goes on, this gets easier and easier. All right, next up here, true or false? Payroll checks will not appear in the print queue along with handwritten and electronic checks to be printed. So thinking back to the payroll transaction type, when you enter one of those in, does that appear in the check queue for you to print if you would like? So true or false on that? People are voting on that now. Okay. Give everyone just another moment or so. All right, looks like I've got an answer from most everybody here. I'm going to close the poll. It looks like the majority of us said false on this one. So we're going to go ahead and see. And exactly right, it is false. All checks are sent to the print queue, including payroll checks. To remove a check from the print queue, click the check and click the Mark as Printed button in the print queue. So not all payroll transactions are necessarily going to be checks. In the case that they're not, you can dismiss them from the print queue, but every payroll transaction, at least initially, will appear in the print queue to give you the option if you want to print it. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, next up, true or false? When processing a recurring transaction, you cannot change the amount of any of the line items on the transaction. So thinking about recurring transactions, when you are processing that transaction, are you kind of stuck in with the amounts that it shows? So again, people answering pretty rapidly here. Looks like we have just about everybody. Again, we had a unanimous answer here. Everyone said false, and you guys are right on the money. When you process a recurring transaction, anything about the transaction can be edited before posting. This allows you to create recurring transaction for items that may have variable amounts from period to period. And when I say anything, I didn't even mention if you all of a sudden you're going with a different vendor for your let's say trash, you can change the vendor. You can not the vendor, sorry, the payee. You can change the line item you're using. You can change the amounts. Anything you need to change, you can change when you're entering in that recurring transaction. All right. Next one up here. True or false? When creating a journal entry, applying a credit to a bank account will decrease the account balance. So thinking about how journal entries work and how debits and credits work, when creating a journal entry, applying a credit to a bank account will decrease the account balance. Is that true or false? So give everyone some time on this one. This one may be a little trickier. Okay. Give everyone just another few seconds to answer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here. So it looks like the majority of us said true, and you're right. A credit to an asset will decrease the account balance, while a debit will increase the account balance. And that's a little bit of what I was mentioning earlier. Don't get hung up on the words debit and credit and what you might traditionally think about them. That's really not true when it comes to accounting. Debit and credit truly just mean left side and right side of the transactions, and different types of accounts are affected in different ways by debits and credits. I encourage you guys to check that chart out if you're just not sure on that. Okay. Um, well, and shoot, this last one, I guess I apologize on this. I did not hit this point entirely, but let's go ahead and we'll ask this question anyway. You can edit any transaction regardless of status or the year the transaction was written. So thinking about transactions and editing transactions and when you're able to do certain things, you can edit any transaction from any date at any time. Is that true or false? So, all right. Looks like most of us answered. Looks like the majority said false on that, and you guys are exactly right. There are some limits on when you can make edits to transactions. If a transaction has been voided, sorry, not voided. I apologize. Well, I guess voided would be true. If a transaction has been voided, if it's been reconciled, if it's in a locked fiscal year, you cannot make any changes to it. So transactions can only be edited as long as they've not been reconciled and they fall within an unlocked fiscal year. Fiscal years can be unlocked as long as the end of that year falls within 15 months of today's date. And I talked a little bit more about that during our training last time. So I would encourage you to, once the recordings for those are out, we will have those out again shortly after the conclusion of our training series. I would encourage you to check that out if you have any questions about that. And speaking of questions here, do we have any questions? Looks like Rod has been doing a good job of kind of keeping up with the questions here in the questions window. But if you guys have been holding on to the end for any questions you might have, go ahead and ask them now. We're happy to get those questions answered for you. If you don't have any questions, though, this is the end of the webinar for today. So thank you for attending today's Church 360 Ledger webinar. Any questions you might have about it, you can email us in support@cts.cph.org or call us at 1-800-346-6120. Looks like we have a question here from Jim. Will we be required to update to the new version of Ledger? Eventually, yes. We don't plan on keeping the previous version of Ledger around forever. We don't have an end date set in mind. I would encourage you, if you haven't made the move to the new version of Ledger, I would encourage you doing that, as soon as you can. We've included a lot of improvements here in the new version of Ledger, just made things easier to use. A big part of that is our reporting, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. But I would encourage you guys to make the move to the new version of Ledger. So absolutely, I would say while it's not required, I would suggest it. Okay. All right. Let's see. Yeah, no problem, Dale. Thanks for joining us today. And just keeping an eye out here for any other questions. I don't see anything else coming in. I'll give everyone just another minute or so. But again, if you didn't have any other questions, feel free to drop off and go about your day. And hopefully, I'll see you tomorrow for our reports training. Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to end the training. Thank you so much for joining us today.